How's it going, guys? Welcome to the stream. It's Illuminostic. Tonight, we're going to solve all of the world's problems in 45 minutes or less. But seriously, I mean, like I said in the description or the title, it's clear that there's some kind of psychedelic renaissance happening. But the shape that it takes and whether or not it'll stick this time is, hello, Micah. Yet to be seen, we saw what happened with the last one. I feel like a lot of the people from the 1960s that had, meaningful experiences of a transcendental nature, whether it was going to India and meeting with the Maharishi or, taking LSD at a Grateful Dead concert or a combination of all of these things kind of slipped back into their stupors. They all went back to sleep. They were lulled away and back into the sort of, conventional matrix reality. And it really, to my eyes, it seems as though both Orwell and Huxley were correct. The one, Orwell basically suggesting or prophesying, really, that fear and constant surveillance would be used to control the public, whereas Huxley felt that, immoral and sort of free love and sex out of the context of any meaningful substance, combined with drugs like Xanax. He had the Soma that everyone carried around in their belt, and they would take a pill of it if they had any distressing thoughts. It's like the elites really used a combination of these two approaches. There's actually a really great debate. You can find a transcript of Huxley and Orwell debating, and it's like, looking at it in hindsight, they were both right. And so, but let's not condemn the 1960s generation completely, because I feel like what they did do is that they lit a match, and it was a really important match. And a lot of them did go out into the streets and get their skulls busted open by police, protesting civil rights. A lot of people felt like, they had been commissioned by the universal mind to go out and make LSD accessible, and they knew the risk they were taking, and they did end up in prison for decades. A lot of people have made huge sacrifices. A lot of scientists and clinicians and, even universities have put their reputation at stake because this was extremely taboo subject matter, and the people that have, I don't want to sound like I'm underappreciating the people that have made the sacrifices and had the courage to get us to the point where, we have legal psychedelic plants in San Francisco, and I think the entire state of Colorado just legalized all psychedelic plants. And so, these are things that honestly, even with my sort of like, I don't know if I want to call myself a radical or like uber progressive or whatever, almost an anarchist, I guess. No, actually totally an anarchist. But you know what I mean? It surprises me to see that this happened. The marijuana thing surprised me, and now that we're seeing this sort of tidal wave of momentum behind psychedelics, it really is something that I didn't think I would ever see. Now, on the other hand, we have an equal mass of opposing energy, which is chaos and confusion, potential for violence. We have the residuals of decades of misinformation, misunderstanding, deliberate propaganda on the part of not only the government, but a lot of religious people. I feel like, Christians and other similar types of creatures have a particularly sensitive, they get triggered by anything that sort of purports to be spiritual, but is not part of their religious paradigm. Right, and because psychedelics, what's going on, Big Loon, clearly have some sort of like measurable effect on the development of the character and the capacity for empathy and self-awareness. That is real spiritual growth. Finding some old creepy self-help book and trying to conform to the rules that it sets forth is not spirituality. That's just, there are a lot of words for what that is. But real gnosis, direct knowledge, the experience of removing or turning down the filters that separate us from the unity consciousness that is actually our fundamental state in nature. This affects actual change. It catalyzes our consciousness to expand, and for whatever reason, however you want to think about it, that exposure seems to really lift people up above a lot of the lower, more base behaviors that have plagued mankind for ever, really, right? So I kind of got off subject a little bit there because I got inspired in the moment, I guess. But, what I was saying is that regardless of that, the fact that, psychedelics have so much promise, and that, if success is your proof, then they've already proved their efficacy, right? Because they do change people in positive ways. I think you might be misunderstanding what liberalization actually is, but we're going to get to the scrambled political narratives eventually. What I'm saying is, regardless of this capacity for these compounds to heal traumas, to impart greater clarity, to actually increase IQ. I mean, that's actually been documented and measured. People of average intelligence have spontaneously induced genius in LSD experiments. It's not something that happens often, but it has happened in a clinical setting. But for your average person, you can enhance your memory, which is directly going to expand your capacity for general intelligence, right? It's basically upgrading the CPU. And now we know these things are not like wooey hypotheticals because they've actually done in situ and in vitro experiments. We know that you are actually physically upgrading the hardware, because if you're going to if you're going to improve your cognition, there has to be a physical basis for that. And now we know that in neuroplasticity and neurogenesis, we have an actual physical basis to support what the hippies were saying back in the day, that these things actually do enhance and expand your consciousness and, in the pragmatic sense, just your cognitive abilities in general, and balancing your mood, all of this stuff. But here's where we're going a little bit awry, and where we really need to find artful, graceful, subtle, and tactful ways to do our own social engineering. Unfortunately, as Terencemckenna said, if we do not engineer ourselves, someone else is going to do it for us. And unfortunately, that is the general rule. That's the standard. Most people are operating within a very narrow bandwidth, politically, spiritually, and because of our psychology, the way that our being is structured, basically, we have the capacity to delude ourselves and to avoid perceiving things that do not fit into the worldview that we're comfortable with. And one of the things I see a lot is that people feel like once they have realized that they have been duped by the mainstream, they basically take all those bad perceptual habits, all of these cognitive aberrations that are actually hardwired into our survival instincts, so they're hard to get rid of. I'm not saying I don't empathize, but we bring those with us to the new box that we have lodged ourselves in. And we have to do better than that. We have to do more than that. And so what we have to be able to do is to accept the true and real gift of psychedelic medicine, which, aside from healing ancestral trauma and, expanding our capacity to even perceive the more subtle manifestations of the universe, we have to be able to confront the universe as it actually is. And one of the great dangers of psychedelics is that, neuroplasticity is great, neurogenesis is great, but the reason for acid casualties, right? People that took LSD for years and years and years and years and years without any direction, without any purpose, right? If you have all of these new neural pathways forming, you have all this new neurogenesis going on, and you have the ability to change your mind fluidly, you can just hardwire a bunch of nonsense, and that doesn't do you any good. So, when people talk about the importance of setting an intention going into a psychedelic experience, that is absolutely tremendously important, and also outside of the medicine space, to develop a mindfulness practice so that we are always directing our own internal evolution, maintaining the trajectory of our own internal dialogue, to develop the discipline and willpower to remain constantly within the strictures and constraints that are that those should inform our every breath, our every deed, to bring us into alignment with our higher purpose, our higher self. And as a general movement, and this is where things get more complicated, we have to find the higher self, the holy guardian angel, however you want to think about it, for the entire movement. And it is my humble opinion that there is tremendous effort being put into creating a very divided atmosphere, particularly in the United States, but in other places around the world. And I would also suggest that this psychedelic momentum that we're having is part of the reason that they're doing that. Because they realize that a population that has had gnosis, that has healed their traumas and isn't out of control, that's making its own decision, that understands the sovereignty of its own will, is not going to be able to be controlled, it's not going to tolerate it, and it knows it doesn't need it. Right? So, and really, they even have the sort of the laws of evolutionary biology working against them in that regard too, because nature subjects things that are not necessary to de-emphasis and de-evolution ultimately. So if we can sort of relinquish our need for overlords, they will fucking vanish, and nature will take care of it. So this is something that all we can do is take individual responsibility to a higher and higher and higher level, to improve our own mastery, to integrate practices and habits into our lives that facilitate this rapid growth and self-control. Greetings, Jeff Norris. And this question from Micah about, whether I think the liberalization of psychedelics and cannabis these days is a forced hand from the government and officials. I don't see, why that would be the case. I don't really understand everything that's going on in the world. I don't think anyone does. I honestly am a bit surprised at some of the forward movement of the psychedelic movement in the legal arena, but you have to remember that's on a state level. And state governments are only the enemy to the extent that they're controlled by the feds. So I think that's what's happened is that, people have evolved. The information has been validated, I guess. There have been enough studies at Ivy League schools and places like Johns Hopkins University that have established that psychedelics work wonders, literal wonders. I mean, a lot of the people that have taken a look at the efficacy of psychedelics for, I don't know, anything, you name it, any psychological aberration known to man. And that's literally what a few of them said. One of the early doctors, Dr. Humphrey Osmond, way back in the early 1960s, was asked to summarize the research into psychedelics, and that's what he said. I don't know that this is verbatim, but it's nearly word for word. He said, these compounds have the ability to cure just about every known psychological aberration known to man, and oftentimes with a single dose. And I don't know if he did this on purpose or not, but there was a researcher at Johns Hopkins a couple of years ago that said it is simply unprecedented in the history of psychiatry that any medicine could have this wide-ranging efficacy and also often work its magic in a single dose. So it's it seems inevitable, I guess, that at least on a state level, that there's you can't really get around it anymore. You know, that it doesn't make sense that people have languished in prisons for decades for possessing LSD, which is not only not nearly as dangerous as they told us it was for decades, but is also tremendously helpful, beneficial substance. You know, and it's very difficult, I think, to argue against that at this point. Even some of the major players in the drug war in the last year or so, from back in the 80s, you know, they admitted that they were wrong. What we're not seeing, I don't think, is a lot of movement on the federal level. There has been some acknowledgement of certain things, but I mean, they've acknowledged the medical efficacy of marijuana, you know, a long time ago, and they still haven't rescheduled it. So I think, you know, one of our major impediments, the big stumbling block, is going to be the feds. And there is so much smoke coming from those guys right now that it's hard to imagine that they will ever cooperate with their populace in a meaningful way when it comes to relinquishing control. Anything that they can use as a tool to suppress, you know, revolutionaries and undesirables and, you know, all of the people that they don't find favor with, they're not going to relinquish those reins easily. Obviously, you know, the DEA even admitted just a couple of months ago that a spokesperson for the DEA actually said the only reason that the DEA exists is that there is a racial and class war. Now, that pretty much was the game over for the conspiracy theorists to an extent, because, you know, when when a federal agency admits that the United States government engages in class war, the fact that this was just like a blip on the internet when this guy from the DEA said that, it blows my mind that people don't take these things and read into it what the greater context is. You know, and speaking of psychedelics and the difficulties inherent in this movement, that's one of them, man, that people just are not like. I think it's maybe just that the school system has sort of abandoned teaching critical thinking or something, you know? I mean, I don't have a good explanation for that. And it's one of the things that kind of scares me, you know? Before I sort of got sidetracked trying to figure out how to answer this question, you know, it's really complicated. You know, I was talking about the you know, benefits of neuroplasticity and neurogenesis and the sort of liberation from the you know, traumas of our past and all of these wonderful things, but without some sort of unified, well-defined vision, you know, no movement can really even form or go anywhere. And what I see out there is, you know, so much divisiveness that it's not really happening. There's no coagulation. You know, that's one of the reasons that, you know, if you guys go way back to the beginning of my YouTube career, there's a video that I made called The Eye of Horus, I think. And in it, I talk about how once the two parties start to blur their distinctions, that's when we know we're really in trouble. Because it's actually in mixing the narratives and then filling them with wedge issues that they're able to completely divide everyone. And that's what's happened. So, yeah, some resolution to that is in order. But let me finish trying to answer this question. So I don't see why, you know, as you called it, the liberalization. I think that what you mean by that is probably legalization or mainstream adoption. I don't see how it could be part of a grand scheme of control, and I would be much more suspicious of it if it were the feds, although, you know, we really need that. We need the feds to let everyone out of prison that they have incarcerated for marijuana and psychedelics. And not only that, but they should probably pay reparations to all of them because it's a hideous injustice that anyone ever went to jail for any of those things. Our will is sovereign, and they never had any right. They never had any right, and even worse, they never had any reason. They had no justification. There was never a misunderstanding. You know, this is something I've said quite a few times on this channel, but it bears repeating over and over and over and over if that's what we have to do. But speaking of the government acknowledging and point blank just telling the press that it engages in class war, you know, kind of a similar thing happened with psychedelics. The researchers in the 1960s, no one said these chemicals are extremely dangerous, they need to be controlled, people need to be incarcerated if they sell them to people. Most of the horror stories, you know, people putting frying pans on their faces and jumping out of windows, that one was actually true, but it's because the CIA put like, you know, a huge dose of LSD in this agent's coffee and didn't tell him just to see what he would do, and he jumped out the window. You know, so like one of the only legitimate horror stories relating to LSD that they could find, they did it. It was them. And a lot of the other ones were actually traced back to the government. It was all propaganda. So the point is that they knew, you know, when I talked about Dr. Humphrey Osmond telling them that, you know, these compounds can cure like alcoholism, depression, all of these things. And by the way, you guys, you know, let's assume that this data is accurate. That for example, LSD is 85% more efficacious at treating alcoholism than other modalities, right? How many drunk driving accidents, how many abused families, how many ruined lives, how many, you know, all of these things, alcohol, murder, all of this shit might not have happened if they had actually just accepted what the researchers they hired, you know, to tell, you know, yeah, I mean, why aren't people asking these questions? It kills me. But yeah, Dr. Humphrey Osmond made that report to the federal government, and instead of saying, okay, wow, we have these amazing tools that we can go and fix our society with, they sent guys with guns to go shut down the experiments. They actually didn't do that quite literally. They sent papers out to all of them. And it was that day, you know, they sent papers out saying that these, all of this research is illegal as of this moment. Stop it now. That was their response to their researchers telling them that they could fix basically everything that is wrong with people, at least, you know, on a psychological level. So, you know, it was never a misunderstanding. It was not that they were misinformed. That never happened. That never happened. They knew what these things did from the beginning, and that's why they banned them. So, you know, I know I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, but there are still so many naive people out there that believe that, you know, the government is really there to look out for their best interests and their safety, and, you know, there is overwhelming evidence to the contrary, you know. Yeah, Northern Lights, I bet it did, you know. I mean, it's not just one run of clinical trials at this point. This stuff has been known. I can't remember what the word for it was. When the people know of a cure, there's this word. But you know what I mean. On a folk remedy level, people have known what psychedelics do, you know, since, and I'm talking about just Western culture, modern Western culture. You know, a lot of people have known this stuff since the 1960s. But at this point, yeah, it's not, the research was done then. That's another thing I think a lot of people miss. The research was done back then, you know, and it's resumed recently, and it's just confirmed what we've already known for 50 years. You know, it's one of the reasons I don't really watch a lot of, you know, content about this kind of stuff anymore. I'm so sick and tired of listening to people talk about this stuff as if it's a new discovery. It turns my stomach, you know what I mean? I've been part of this culture since I was a child. And this is not new. People need to stop it. It's not helpful. You know, we need to have the courage to face reality, and that includes our governments, you know, as it is, and not as we would like to find them to be. You know, it's a difficult thing. And one of the, I think I went off on this tangent before and never tied it up, so I'll do it now. The ability or the capacity that these compounds have to facilitate our own, like, engineering of our own neurobiology, right? One of the negatives of that is that if we can't deal with reality, there is no better tool than to help override all your sensibilities and, accept a bunch of ridiculous woo that makes you feel good about life. And, as a medicine facilitator, I see that constantly. That's what people are hoping you're going to help them do for the most part. And in reality, that's what most facilitators will do. And now we're kind of getting to the dark side of all this stuff, although it's still not as dark as the world would be if these things didn't exist at all. But it is true that if you pay attention, you notice that a lot of facilitators will just... They're not really trying to develop any kind of personal relationship with anyone. They're not going to be frank and sincere and honest if it's necessary. They are going to try to get good reviews and good word of mouth, and it can be less than helpful to just sort of reinforce a bunch of bad ideas. What these medicines are actually for is to focus get all that stuff out of our system, to be able to perceive the universe, dark and light, good and bad, as it actually is. And that's the first step, like you can't build a foundation until you have surveyed the landscape. You know what I mean? So, trying to think, if I've really got my point across here, or if there's anything else that, yeah, and I can't think about focusing anywhere else, because when I look out into the, I guess, social media landscape, I'm kind of isolated. I'm out in the middle of the Amazon rainforest most of the time, so I've been thinking a little bit about that lately. Like, I wonder what it would actually look like if I was on the ground in the United States. Maybe my perspective would be a little bit different, but it seems to me that we have people that are just basically adopting narratives wholesale. It's not like people are really getting it figured out and transcending the spell of culture, and it's the antidote to all of this is courage as much as anything else. People, I think, what I've learned from all of these experiences with this medicine and just talking to people and watching, is that people are afraid to admit that they don't know. This is why a lot of the dumbest conspiracy theories take root. This is also why the people that should be listening to some of the conspiracy theorists won't. It's why I am really taking the position, in my own medicine work, that we are not trying to convince ourselves that we can manifest a unicorn just by thinking about it, and the universe is nothing but a sea of pure love, and all of this sort of stuff that is sort of ubiquitous. And it's just kind of an unfortunate circumstance that people will pay people to tell them what they want to believe, and they will pay a facilitator or a psychedelic therapist to hardwire that stuff into their heads so that they can sleep well at night, and let me check out the chat again. I worry that my loosening of the laws involving psychedelics will then be used as an excuse for jackboot clamp down underground cultures being underground. Well, sure, yeah, and I hear you, man. I do. It's like give them just enough rope to hang themselves is kind of what you're saying. I mean, I can see that, but then again, the numbers are just like a little bit too crazy at this point. It's really difficult to understand, what we're seeing happening in the United States and why exactly it's happening. The main thing that I'm seeing, and the best advice that I can give, is that people need to let go of their chosen narratives. Your political orientation, forget about it. Forget about it. Reevaluate everything. I'm 43 years old. I've I have an IQ above 140. I've spent my entire life studying everything I can get my hands on. I mean, that's all, music, science, philosophy, mysticism, like just cramming my brain with stuff, observing everything all the time, including my own mind, and I still constantly question everything I think. And I think that, it's scary to do that. But it is absolutely the healthiest habit you can possibly develop. You have to be in a state of flow in every way imaginable. And, without really going after any particular group, that's the thing that I really feel is of the utmost importance. That people really learn to scrutinize every idea, every thought, every belief that they have, totally objectively. The inability to do that, I think, is the number one problem in the world right now. That people either cannot or will not shine the light where, they're unable to see. And look at us. Bunch of goddamn monkeys flailing around like lunatics. And there's so much potential. That's the thing. Like, if we can avert the crisis that is closing in from every direction. I mean, we're on the brink of World War III. I'm in the rainforest. If it was light out, I would show you right behind me. If you guys have been watching me for a year or so, there used to be jungle back there. Now there's no jungle there. And, there's more and more of it. I see it all the time. When we first moved here, I couldn't see any deforestation. Now I see it all over the place. Ego death reset button. Yeah. You know what I mean? I mean, you guys know, the ocean is dying. Basically, like 10% of the organisms that were there in 1970 are still there. We had a really healthy sort of progressive movement in the early 2000s that was making a lot of progress and doing all this positive stuff. And it seems like, I don't really feel like it's been hijacked. I think what's going on is that there are right-wing like parasites that have connected to it, and they sort of plant these ridiculous narratives and things that they know are going to incite the right to hate the left more and more and more. They do this on both sides, It's and that's another thing that I think people really have a hard time wrapping their heads around. They really want to believe that there is a team that is batting for them at the top of the heap. And I've also noticed, I was on some Twitter feed the other day, I can't remember what happened, something political, and every side was talking, Republican, Democrat, they were talking about the other side in exactly the same way, using the exact same rhetoric and accusing each side of the exact same stuff. I don't see how anyone could not scroll through that and understand what's happening there. So, and I also noticed that the few people that were saying, like, you guys realize that both sides do this stuff, that it's literally, two sides of the same coin. There was hundreds of likes on almost every one of the divisive, mudslinging posts. And then the few people that could actually see the truth, there would be like 2 likes. Everyone just ignores it. It is, it's maddening for someone like myself. This is something that I feel has happened to me since I've started, trying to make content, is that the stuff that I feel is the most meaningful and the most important, just totally gets overlooked because it's outside of people's comfort zones. Yeah. And so, I really encourage everyone, don't use this medicine to just reinforce your own beliefs. You have to make a friend of fear. You don't want to abolish it, because if you do that, you're going to die. It serves a purpose. But we really have to develop a sort of fearlessness, and to really learn to not become attached to our own ideas. The Buddha supposedly said all those years ago that all suffering is rooted in attachment. And I think that, if nothing else, our societal suffering is very much rooted to attachment to ideologies and ideas and beliefs. It is like watching WWE wrestling. It really is. And today I heard that Donald Trump said that they need to delete the Constitution and get rid of all the rules. And I'm not trying to float my own horn again, but I remember when he first ran, the first thing I said was he's shooting for dictator. And here he is suggesting that the Constitution get repealed, and I'm really curious to see what the right-wing response is going to be to that, because I know he has such hardcore devotees, and people have faith in him in almost the same way that they have faith in Jesus. In both cases, it's totally misplaced. So, yeah, I mean, especially considering that, the right-wing Republican thing has always been the Constitution is blah, blah, blah. And, they burned that thing years ago. They invalidated the Constitution with other laws, decades ago. So I don't know what people are talking about, So this will be an interesting thing to see in the days that follow, how people are going to react to, Donald Trump really, I think, going too far finally for even his own demographic. Islam and the Quran is definitely not the true unchanged word of God. There is none. All of these institutionalized religions are tools for control and manipulation. And in the case of Christianity, I think it's even engineered to sort of demonize consciousness itself. If you look at the story in the book of Genesis, I think it's appallingly clear, the condemnation of the human race, our immortality was taken away because we pursued gnosis. That's really the message that is sent in the book of Genesis. And if you look at the world and you look at the people that believe in that book and follow it as the true word of God, you can see that they were successful in demonizing consciousness. I mean, Lucifer, the enemy of this religion, is the light bearer, the electromagnetic wave. That's the source of all light and life and everything in the universe. It really does seem to me that these mainstream religions are actually, it's like they reverse engineered spirituality. And in my opinion, it's like the greatest blasphemy ever in the history of blasphemies, to create spiritual systems that are designed to curtail spiritual development, which is exactly the effect that these things have on people. On the other hand, I think we can understand how it is that psychedelic medicine raises people up without even invoking any spiritual cause or connecting it to any woo at all. By the way, you guys, do me a favor, hit the like button, share, subscribe, support us on Patreon, where I do secret streams. Speaking of Freemasons, 32nd Degree Mason has agreed to have a conversation with me, and that's going to happen in the next couple of weeks or so. It's going to be awesome because he sounds just like me. He's got face tattoos, and but definitely totally legit. The ceremony, the parts that he was allowed to video, he's for real. So that's about to happen. But it's not going to be secret. It's going to be public. But yeah, join the Patreon. You can join our secret streams and support our efforts. We're demonetized. I don't have a super chat button because of that. I get no money from YouTube. In fact, let me throw the links that you can click on to support us. I usually do that at the beginning, but I'm gonna have to do it now. What were we talking about, though? I know we were talking about the tree of life and the demonization of consciousness itself. Oh, yeah. So this is a good one, you guys. How to understand the apparent spiritual, like, raising up of people, the evolution that is catalyzed by psychedelics without invoking woo. And this is just my idea. Here you go, guys. Here's the Zelle, PayPal options to support the channel, which we really appreciate. It seems to me that order, I don't think it just seems to me, this is pretty much incontrovertible, I guess, but order is symmetry, right? And I think that one of the ways that you can understand why it is that gnosis, that whether it's pranayama, breathing techniques, or ayahuasca, or LSD, or whatever it is that connects you to the universal mind, you're basically exposing the pattern of your being to the greater pattern, which is imparting a greater degree of symmetry to your internal being relative to the rest of the universe. And so if you can understand it like that and you don't like woo, then you still have a solid way of understanding how it is that this happens. One of the arguments I think that people have made a lot, and with good reason, is that, Charles Manson took LSD. And he did achieve some degree of enlightenment, but somehow remained kind of a psychopath. How is that possible? It's also incredible to me that so many people would completely disregard Big C, what's going on, man? Psychedelics, because they say, well, they didn't turn every single person that took LSD into a Buddha the first time on the spot. Who expects that of anything? You know what I mean? But I can remember even back in high school, people would say that, well, I know people that have taken acid and they're still dicks. That's not, nobody ever said, just eat this piece of paper and you will be perfectly, without sin, you'll be the goddamn savior of humanity. And no, it's not like that. And particularly in the case of LSD, if there's not an intention from the beginning, if the person has not developed not only the intention, and this is why other practices like meditation, or even other plant medicine allies like rape are so important, because it's not just that you have to go into the experience with an intention. You have to have the ability to guide the process internally. And, a good facilitator or shaman can do that for you for sure. But it is much better, after a while, for you to develop the ability to do it yourself. And, I've made videos outlining what a lot of those practices look like. But, there are two main things that we have to do. And by the way, all of your individual work is for the collective. So there's no line of demarcation there once you understand all of this stuff. Everything you do for yourself is going to make a contribution to this greater tapestry that we are all trying to lift up before it consumes itself. It's really not cool that we light the same or that we kindle the same energy that lights the stars upon our enemies. Probably should stop that. Burning the shadows of moms and dogs into sidewalks is not cool. And at any rate, so psychoanalysis is something that can be done by the individual on themselves, and it requires some degree of objectivity. It requires some degree of intelligence. But if you don't have either of those things, you shouldn't be taking psychedelics anyways. So if you are if you are fit to use this medicine at all, these things are not out of your reach. And so learning some psychoanalysis techniques, there's lots of great books on it. Israel Regardie even wrote some good books about it, and developing a mindfulness practice. And so one of the basic things that you have to learn to do is to observe your own activity and behaviors. Notice which ones are not consistent with what you perceive to be your higher purpose or your best you, or however you want to think about it. And then you have to learn to analyze, to figure out where those influences came from. So I'll give you a quick example of this from my own life. And, this doesn't happen overnight. But I noticed that I had this tremendous self-sabotaging habit. And really, really bad. I mean, really bad. Like, I would build things that were, like, impossible, and everyone would be so blown away. It would seem like there was, like, had to be, like, some higher power at work even to make this stuff materialize, because I wasn't even doing a lot of it. It was nuts. I mean, it still is, it's not like I've stopped or something, but then I would just blow it up when I was, like, right at the finish line. And so, of course, I spent some time thinking about that. And so I traced it back. This is the... And what you can do is use the like landmark examples. You don't need to recognize every little bit of it throughout your whole life, but you'll find these big ones and you link them back earlier and earlier and earlier and earlier. And the thing is, when you're doing this, because of the mind works, you're actually creating a sort of pattern of recognition. So even like once you have created the habit of doing this consciously, your subconscious mind will pick it up and start doing it automatically, right? And so not only the analysis part, but also the resolution of these things. And oftentimes just understanding the cause is enough to ameliorate the effect. And so, or ameliorate you from the effect. And so in my own case, I just kept going back and back and back. Like, what is this? Where did it come from? And so I traced it all the way back to this time that I built a soapbox derby car with my dad. And I was a Boy Scout, and so it was the fastest one, and I was winning. And it started going too fast, and I got kind of scared. And instead of just pulling the brake, I jumped out of it right at the finish line. I was going to win by like a long margin. I smoked everyone, and I'm like, damn, man, this has been going on forever. And I think I ate, surprise, surprise, psilocybin mushrooms a short time after this realization of the Boy Scout thing. And it's like I was in the passenger seat. I was probably like 5 years old or something. And I wanted some ice cream. I might have been 7. I don't know. I wanted some ice cream. And, my family was dirt poor. My mom was a single mom. My dad was a completely insane, drug-addicted alcoholic. He wasn't even my biological father, which I didn't even know until I was 11. I mean, I literally actually called Jerry Springer when I was like 10 and got a call back, right? Like, it was like that. So I wanted the ice cream, and my mom, I was like, can I have some ice cream? And what are we talking about? 1989, shitty ice cream, 50 cents or something. And she just screamed in my face, like blood red, just screamed, "You don't deserve ice cream," and I was like, oh, fuck, I guess I don't. And so I realized that my mom just said that because she was so angry and embarrassed that she couldn't afford ice cream. And so that was like a huge, it's almost like I was transported back to, when I was 7 years old and that happened, and somebody explained it to me then, and it helped to break the spell to an extent, right? And then, in my case, it actually gets a little bit worse than that, because my mom also, she eventually did commit suicide, she also would constantly threaten suicide throughout my entire life. And, it may have been the same trip or somewhere around that period when I realized that I was smart enough as a child that I understood that the reason that she was threatening suicide was that she was a single mom and couldn't stand the pressure. So my suicide attempts started at 6 or something. I remember one of the teachers found me like trying to saw through my wrist with the scissors that you cut up paper. They're kid safe, so you can't do it. But I was like, I'll alleviate this. So I didn't deserve to be alive. I didn't deserve ice cream. I didn't deserve to win the soapbox. So I would sabotage myself throughout the rest of my life because of these early patterns, this conditioning. And so what happens is, in these psychedelic states, those neural nets are loosened. They become malleable, and you're able to re-engineer them. And I think also a good way to think about it is that they, once they're loosened from their like distorted positioning, they sort of naturally just fall back where they're supposed to be, because there are, laws and numbers and, things that govern that stuff. And yeah, so it's not like, you take these substances one time or two times or and you have to develop the skill set to get the most out of it. You have to learn how to, maintain your focus and engineer your being consciously. This is also why it's really important to get dosage right, because if you get really overwhelmed, you're not going to really be able to control the situation. And I think having a few of those experiences where you're not sure if you're going to make it, those experiences are important. That's when the real crazy spiritual stuff happens. But there also is a genuine risk of, becoming a muddle-headed mystic from going too far out, where you don't have the ability to guide the process consciously. Let's see. What's the relationship between the ego, gnosis, enlightenment? Is striving for gnosis or enlightenment an ego trip? Miklos, I don't know if you're still there, because I noticed some people have been dropping off, but that's worthy whether you hear it or not, I guess. That's a complicated question, and I think that the idea of ego dissolution is, people kind of misunderstand that. I'm even sometimes suspicious of the origins of that particular narrative, that what we want to do is completely destroy our ego. It's not about dissolving the ego. It's about developing a healthy relationship with it. There's this Tool song where he says something like, we must define the ego before it's far too late, which was saying that we have to give it shape. We have to have a clear sense of self. We have to, like I've been talking about throughout this stream, to engineer ourselves to become a being that does not need oversight, so that nature can subject our overlords to de-emphasis and de-evolution. So, it's definitely not, seeking gnosis or enlightenment is not an ego trip. But I think we have to be really, really careful and remember that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And we have to remember that the history of the Buddha, for example, was written by his followers and is therefore, circumspect. It's like if the Manson family had written Charlie's history, it would probably read just like the Buddha story. And I'm not going to name any names, but some of the most obviously advanced and enlightened humans that I have ever seen are not bliss bunnies. They're not all light and good. They're equal parts light and darkness. So I think that a lot of our beliefs about what spirituality is, what enlightenment is, what illumination is, not consistent with reality, which should not be a surprise. If I don't think we have much of anything right yet at this juncture, and I think it really takes a lot of courage and a lot of motivation that a lot of people don't have. Most people are not motivated to find out things they don't want to know, and I think that a lot of this true illumination is not what people think. And that's why we see a lot of this stuff. Aleister Crowley is a great example of that. I've never seen anyone able to communicate the kind of things that he did with that kind of concision, and it's obviously real. You know what I mean? But the dude was definitely not all rainbows and unicorn farts or whatever. So no, gnosis is real. It's definitely real. But in my opinion, and all of my research and studying, what it really is the ability to view the entire universe, not necessarily all of it at once, but to be able to look at any part or piece of it completely objectively. And what you get when you do that is very, very intense. And it can put you in a state of existential dread, for sure, give you an existential crisis. When you really understand the roles that dark and light and day and night and all of these antinomies play and the necessity of them all, it's too much for most people. But I'm of the opinion that you can't cure cancer if you refuse to believe that it's not just a cold. You're just going to die. And to me, that's basically what most of humanity is doing right now. And through whatever mechanism, maybe our desire to survive will be enough of a catalyst. Maybe. But, we have to collectively, suddenly pull our heads out of our asses and, have the courage and determination to actually confront the universe on its terms. And we have to do it in good health, psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually. And it is absolutely true that these compounds can help us to open those doors. But we have to do it with a tremendous amount of willpower and discipline and self-determination. Self-determination is probably the most lacking and difficult of all of these qualities. I know that I've probably already said this, but what the one thing that I see the most in plant medicine, other than shamans with too much ego, is people that are really just using these compounds to reinforce the woo they want to believe, to make it more real for themselves. And, I'm not saying that even in the cases of those people that ayahuasca is not helpful, by and large. It definitely, I can't imagine that there are still people that haven't experienced it. It's like half of the universe is still invisible to you, and you can't really navigate a highway if your vision's at 50%. You're gonna even just accidentally do evil, So this whole idea of polishing, of squeegeeing our third eye, so that we can navigate the terrain that we're confronted with is, do you think that the psychedelic experience is better when augmented with the exoteric initiatory experience? Yeah, and it's actually essential, I think. That's one of the unfortunate things about the psychedelic movement in the United States back in the 60s. I started to talk about this earlier, but I veered off. We were just traveling for 3 days, and so I'm full of kratom and caffeine at the moment, so I might have been a bit all over the place. I think it's settling down now, but the psychedelic movement in the early stages in the United States, they didn't really have a shamanic tradition. There was no one around really to tell them what to do. They were like, it's like somebody gave you the keys to a car, told you how to turn it on, but that's it. And a lot of those cars just started off at 200 miles an hour, So they just didn't have the tools and the experience and the wisdom to really use these things in the way that they needed to. And they still made a lot of progress. So, we are in a much better position relative to the earlier generations in terms of our access to information, our knowledge of shamanic traditions, of other non-shamanic traditions, like pranayama and different forms of meditation and all of these other practices that can inform that can shape our own psychedelic experiences and that can support integration. And, we know a lot about flow state and how to get into flow state and how to minimize the peak and valley experience of the mystics so that we don't go from high to low, and then get super depressed. And people, I worry about that. For people, I don't really, because I, offer hours of integration support after the retreats and stuff, but I wouldn't want to do it, to come down to South America and it's like you're walking through Dr. Seuss's imagination all day and, ayahuasca and all this amazing stuff. And then you go back to your normal life and that's got to be just awful for a lot of people. So, it's really important that those people are able to hopefully free themselves from any aspect of their life that they don't find satisfactory. But in the interim, it's important that they know that they can eat fava beans to support L-dopa, and then that L-dopa can be converted into dopamine, and to have healthy dopamine habits, and and all of these other flow state triggers that we can artfully and consciously insert into our lives in every place that we can. You know what I mean? We have the tools to do this a lot better than the kids in the 1960s, and the thing that we're contending with that they may not have had to deal with is that their issues that confronted their time were much more black and white and much more extreme. They didn't have, I don't know how to put it, this, like the transgender, gender fluidity, that whole argument that is extremely divisive right now. You know what I mean? That kind of thing where there's a lot of subtlety, there's a lot of, both sides have a lot of points in a lot of ways. Like that's a difficult one to really objectively analyze and figure out what actually makes sense. It was like war, racism, and it wasn't like now where it's not as clear what is meant by racism. Like back then in the early 60s, the black men were getting bashed in the head with billy clubs just because they were standing there. That kind of thing was definitely true back then. And worse, and women definitely didn't have the rights. You know what I mean? Like their stuff was much more simple and just obvious. So it was easier for them to unify because, if you can define your enemy, you know what I mean? It's like if you're going to have an argument, you have to define your terms. So if you're going to battle something, you have to be able to define what it is that you're battling. And in their generation, it was much easier to do that. I think the only real solution for the current, I don't want to say generation because it's a multi-generational problem, but for the current period, is that we have to learn to have these differences and be unified where we have common ground. And this is something that I've been saying probably as long as I've had this channel, but the powers that be have managed to convince the left and right to be at each other's throats and hate each other more than they have since the 1960s, even though they have more common ground than they ever had. It's a crazy thing to watch because I'm sort of, outside of both of those demographics, I guess. And, and I have people, this channel, the viewers are split almost down the middle, actually more right-leaning, which, 20 years ago, that would not have been possible. 30 years ago, for sure not. No right-wingers would have been watching my YouTube channel. No conservatives, none of them. They would have literally, I've actually had them try to kill me just because I was there. In 2000, after 9/11, I had dreadlocks, and occasionally rednecks would try to kill me and my wife. Especially like right around after it happened, we were once like picking crystals out of boulders in Silverton, Colorado, and these guys drove by in pickup trucks going like 50 miles an hour and started chucking boulders out of them, going die terrorist because we had dreadlocks. You know what I mean? So in a lot of ways, the gap between the two sides has disappeared, and somehow the media has managed to convince the people that that's not happening, that it hasn't happened. It's a preposterous thing to watch, So that's, man, if I will help you, if you know how to do it, help others, but learn to recognize wedge issues. And it's funny to watch, the right talk about how easily offended the left is and how, all of these things trigger them, and they do the exact same shit about everything the left does. They just have different words for it. That's another thing that has really helped me is to only have any reaction at all to things that are of absolute, immediate importance. That's it. Everything else can just, blow away in the wind. Only the fundamental, foundational stuff and the things that those things relate to should really instigate any kind of reaction from anyone. At least until we get past the point that World War III is not like a relevant concern. But yeah, you guys, it's getting late. I've been talking for a while, and I can't do it anymore. So thank you for spending this time with me. Keep your eyes out for this conversation with Modern Mystic, who is a 32nd degree Mason. It's going to be a hell of a conversation. If you can read the first communication between the two of us, I posted it in the chat. It's basically the same thing that I'm saying all the time. But I don't want to ruin the surprise. Thank you guys so much. Please do support us. I don't know why, but we lost a bunch of patrons this month. I don't know if I said something that pissed somebody off or something, but hopefully I'll continue to do that, because if I'm not making anyone angry, I'm probably not saying anything worthwhile. But we do seriously appreciate your support, and I will see you again very, very, very soon. I think my next stream that I'm going to do is on toxic dads, because I did toxic moms, and I feel like I need to have balance. So good night.